Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Luscious session. Luscious is a red tea. We'll spend some time discussing that today. And by the end of today's session, you should have a good understanding of taste, aroma, and quality assessment for this tea, as well as some odd assortment of other facts related to alleged health benefits of the tea. So before we really get down into this discussion, and I thank one of you who's on the session today for reminding me, keep things in order. Let's get them done in good timing. So I promise we'll get this started in a good timing way. However, I do have to talk about a few things first. First off, you heard that we had received 8 cases of tea last week. We've broken down those cases. We're getting ready to assign names to them. And within the next couple of weeks, we should start to see some availability of those. That's the first thing. Why are we so expeditious this year? Well, there's a couple of reasons that our efficiency has improved. One is we're not aggregating everything together. As tea gets ready by region, we're bringing it in right away. The second is on Thursday, 11 more cases showed up. So we knew we had to break down those first 8 cases. And so now we have 11 cases sitting where there were originally 8 cases. We intend to get busy on those later this week, actually later next week, and get those broken down as well. So that's the progress from that standpoint. So when we're talking about red teas, what essentially is the process? Actually, before we get to process, let's talk location. Because early this morning, I said, well, not that early, 7:15 this morning, I sent you a map of Yunnan. And in that map, there's a picture of Lincang, L-I-N-C-A-N-G. Now, as you look at that map, you'll look on the left-hand side. That's not very geographical, is it? You'll look in the western part of Yunnan, and you'll see right in the central west, right on the border, Lincang. It's the name both of a prefecture and a city. So when you enter that prefecture by airplane, you land in that city. The farms that we're talking about, where Luscious comes from, you would look at that city, look west a bit, and then look north a bit. And that's where this comes from. That's a forested area. In general, Lincang Prefecture has some of the deepest and most extensive tea forests in the world. So they've got about 132,000 acres of forest that's dominated by tea trees in it. They have about 20,000 acres that is over 100 years old tea trees, but they've been planted. So in this 132,000 acres, those have been mostly self-propagated. So why is it that over the years you continue to get surprises from this area? Because not all of this area is deeply explored. Now, some of it is. So some of you have heard of tea from a place called Bingda. And actually that's usually translated as Iceland. And it's supposed to be one of the most famous areas for pure or for fermented tea, both the raw black as well as the fully fermented black. Sadly, this area, although the literature doesn't show it, this area is declining. And it's declining because the way they put the houses around this area. They built the houses too close to the ancient trees. There's runoff from the building and it's killing and quite a lot of it, you can see the damaged trees already. And so that's one of the reasons that we actually didn't take people there in 2019, because when we went, we saw, oh my God, they have environmental degradation in this area. But as opposed to that area, there's lots of areas, just like the Island Mountains, where you got to hike deep into the mountains, and then all of a sudden there's villages. And those are the more pristine areas, and those areas haven't been thoroughly explored. Also, if you go a little further west and north, there's a place called Dehong, D-E-H-O-N-G. That place also is full of forests which have ancient tea trees in it. So I'm trying to get you a picture of kind of where this region is. And Luscious comes from the Lincang region. All right, so let's talk about process. And then we'll save the story for a little bit later in the discussion, because I do have a story that I want to talk about, and that is related to why we actually still are partial owners of a tea factory in China. We'll get into that in a little bit. So what is the process of red tea, particularly red tea coming out of Yunnan? Well, you got to pick the darn stuff, right? You got to decide whether it's ancient tree, old tree, or is it planted? Is it clonal, monoclonal? Luscious, by the way, is bordering on old tree, not quite yet ancient. Then once you pick, back up. Once you decide to pick, you got to make the decision. What's the pick going to look like? Is it a bud only? Is it a bud and a leaf or two? Is it bud and 3 or 4 leaves? So Luscious is a bud and 2 leaves. After you make that decision, then you have to go through normal process. Oh boy, that's a loaded term. What is, in quotes, normal process? There is no such thing. But the standard way of doing red tea would be to wither, and this is what happened in this case. And then you're going to break down the cells of the tea leaf by rolling, and then you're going to pile. Essentially, that's what you're going to do. And at the very end, you're going to apply heat so you reduce the moisture content to an acceptable level and that the leaves can go on the market. That's the basics. There's lots of other steps that can occur, but those are the basics you have to understand. All right. So before we get into storytelling and before we get lost, let's go ahead and start with the demonstration of how to do this tea, and then you'll brew along with us. So for a change, we're going to get this done in a order. For those of you who might have to leave a little early, you'll still be able to take advantage of this, of the demonstration. So it is my absolute, distinct, and great pleasure to bring on the numinous, not venerable today, the numinous tea master, Xiaobei.
Hey, hi. What
Numinous.
numinous tea master. Yeah, it's a new word to me today. Okay, I like it. So today now it's red. It's Yunnan red, but I like red. So it's the same thing, huh? Very same programs. So it's my section. So if everybody like, you can get it simple, easy. how they come. This is my style, it's for me. Okay, so we do.
So this is the tableau. 2 cups and a strainer is all you really need. If you want a third vessel, you can use the third vessel to actually dissipate steam, but this is what you really need. This is the a setup. You're going to use 175-degree water. You're going to make sure first everything is very, very clean.
It's slowly, take a moment. Slowly, yeah.
Yeah, you're not in a hurry when you do this. You want to make sure you get it right. So remembering again that the temperature is going to be 175. It's 4 grams. The 4 grams is already in your baggie. You're going to watch her on this first pass.
What does not quite ancient tree mean?
Oh, in this case, it's between 800 and 1,000 years. So technically, in Yunnan, you normally think of ancient as 1,000 years and older. When you're in the 800 to 1,000 years, I mean, that's pretty darn old, but there's rules about calling things old versus ancient. And so we're just trying to observe those rules. All right, so the tea master is structuring the water, dissipating the steam. Remember, anytime that you're going to do a red tea, err on the side of less heat. When you do that, you'll bring out whatever inherent flavors more crisply and more brightly. All right, she's gotten her water ready.
And one more time.
One more time.
I use this cup. I use this brewing.
She feels it.
Yeah.
It's the right temperature. Puts the tea leaves in. Going to shake the cup up. She gets the leaves on the side because she's going to try and pour the water in such a way that you don't splash directly on the leaves. But if you end up splashing, it does not matter. So don't worry about these details. I tell them to you so that as time goes by and you get better and better at steeping, you'll follow those and you'll find that the taste is even a little bit better. There's always the question which comes up. Why doesn't my tea taste the same at home as it is here? Well, there's several answers. The first and most reliable answer is you're not using the same water that we're using. Remembering, what percentage of tea is water? It's 99.9% water, and the rest is the extrusion from the tea leaves. So that's why the quality of the water, filtered water, spring water, that all makes a difference. End result is always going to be influenced by water.
How many years did you say ancient is? It's 1,000 years or older?
Yes, ancient is 1,000 years or older. Now, you will hear different descriptions of ancient in different regions. And that's very natural because some regions, anything that gets over 300 years is ancient because most of the stuff was cut down. Most of what stuff? Most of the tea bushes, most of the tea plants are cut down and replaced regularly. For example, in the Dragon Well area, they don't ever actually use the term ancient. Instead, they use legacy. And what do they call legacy? Anything that's over 70, 80 years old. So, and that's because that area, they kept replanting, taking down, replanting. And why would you ever do that? You do that because you want your yield as a farmer to be the maximum yield. And so when you're starting out, you're not thinking, oh, do I want to preserve this to become a 1,000-year-old tree or 2,000? No, you're not thinking that. You're thinking, I got to feed my family this year, not in 1,000 generations down the road, this year. And therefore, you want high yield.
On the waterfront, one participant notes that charcoal works great for conditioning water for tea.
This is a great observation. Commentator has said that charcoal is excellent at conditioning tea. Let me modify, I'm sorry, conditioning water. You're exactly right. It's terrible at conditioning tea. It's excellent at conditioning water. Let me modify that and say the best of the charcoal is the bamboo charcoal. Use the bamboo charcoal if you can find it. Hard to find, and most of the time, most of that best and available bamboo charcoal you'll find at Japanese stores. It's rare to get bamboo charcoal from Chinese sources. You can get it, but it's just really, really hard to come by. So great comment. Thank you for that additional comment. All right, so let's start down the story path right now so I can get the story in before we run out of time as well. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is why we ever invested in a small factory in China and how that's related to red tea and how it's related to what we do in China overall. So in the early years, their early years being in the 2000s, what did China look like from a food supply perspective? Basically, starting in around 2004, 2005, oh, breaking the story. That's the 4 minutes story to be continued. The tea master is going to separate the tea leaves from the tea liquor. Not in a hurry. Good. Carefully getting all the liquid out of there. You see the color? And we're going to enter the quality arena. So actually, we're going to take an even closer look at this color. Look at how dark that color is. All right, so this gives you a, whoa, wow, it's got an aroma too. That's not really where I was supposed to start. Couldn't control myself. We'll start with the tea leaves. Remember, this was done at 175-degree water, so we can actually smell in here a little bit. Make good notes. I'm not going to give away what you're going to get. You're going to enter the quality arena. And how do you do that? You take a 175-degree sip and you coat your tongue. And what are you looking for? You're looking for reaction on your tongue. You're looking as you swallow to get a feel for aftertaste. And then you're going to look for energetics. Remember, energetics is the catch-all term that we use for any physical feeling you have after you've drunk it. And you may not get it instantly. It may take a bit for it to display itself. So don't be in a rush if you think, wow, where the heck are my energetics? I don't have any. Be patient. So let's take that sip. Okay, I'm getting a feeling about this. I'm going to confirm it. Okay, so in a minute, when you're doing this yourself, you're going to do the same thing and you're going to describe for me what sort of feeling you get. Remember, I'm not asking for the taste first. I'm asking for the feeling. I'm asking, is it astringent? If so, where? Is it dense? Is it thin? And then, is there a aftertaste at all? I want to know that, and you want to know that. And are there energetics? And again, it may come later, so don't worry about that. Afterwards, you think about aroma, flavor. The leaves right away give away some aroma, so you'll be able to share that right away. And then think about the disparity between the aroma of the leaves, if there is a disparity, the aroma of the tea liquor itself, and then the taste of it, because all of this is interactive. And in order to get the full feel for this tea, you need to consider all of these things and then make a judgment. So I'm going to ask the tea master to brew along with you. So you can get out your baggie. Bag number 3 should be labeled Luscious. And you're going to go ahead and heat the cups. Make sure that your equipment is clean. And you can use any temperature of water between 200 and 175 when you're heating the cup. 212 to 175 does not matter. But once you start brewing, you need to be at 175. You notice the tea master is always touching the cup. She's touching the other cup that she's using to pour water on. Why does she do that? It's not just for fun. It's really, you get used to what the cup should feel like when it's 175. So using all your senses to control the process. Because if you're serving and you get distracted and you end up accidentally leaving 200-degree water, when you touch the cup, you'll know right away, oh, accident. And then you'll rectify that before a true accident happens. All right, so she's added 175-degree water, which you saw her structure there. The timer is set for 4 minutes, which is starting right now. And so we're going back to 2004, 2005, because we're trying to look and understand why we ended up making an investment. And it had to do with stuff that we were learning in those years. So what was the thing that we were learning about the food supply in China? Well, you had at every different level, and to remind you a little bit, remember in the early to mid 2000s, there was the powdered milk scandal, where they were mixing it with other chemicals, and that was causing infants to get sick and die. So you had that scandal. Was that the only LCS activity that was going on? You had other Jocos and LCS working together and really damaging the entire food supply. Well, how did that happen? So all of a sudden, watermelons, which, you know, when you're really getting them at their peak, It's a July, August, and September crop. But you're getting June watermelons that look really red. Wow, delicious. You're getting fruits and vegetables, extremely green. Well, let me think here. Doesn't anybody regulate this stuff? Doesn't China have the equivalent of a USDA or an FDA? Isn't anybody, maybe health departments, local health departments? The answer is yes, all of those things existed. But remember, what was that the era of? That was the era of lining your pockets. Either lining your pockets or filling your tea jars with the most exquisite teas. In other words, you were receiving favors. And when you receive favors, what happened? You stopped regulating the industry that you were supposed to be regulating. That's how the milk thing occurred in the first place. And the milk thing was the only thing that was really reported. There were several times when we ate food when we were traveling in China, and there's this chemical taste. And so you knew right away, oh, I'm not so hungry anymore. I think I've had enough. It looks really good, but I just don't have appetite. Because this practice started to become widespread throughout society. So back in 2004, the first time we went to a state-owned factory, tea factory, that was collecting tea from all over China. When you go to these factories, it's really interesting. You show up, you know, they give you a time, everybody's very formal, and then they take you through whatever it is they want to show you. But if you're looking around, you see all sorts of things happening. So we saw all these buckets with tea in them. And the first thing we ask is, oh, what is this? And so everybody changed the subject up. And we'll come back to what they changed the subject to. And then we'll explain that whole situation. So your timer's gone off. And you're separating the tea from the tea liquor, tea leaves from the tea liquor. And now you're going to enter the quality arena. So the first thing you're going to do is take a look at these leaves, smell the leaves. Remember, it's 175, so you don't have to worry so much about the nasal passage. Still use caution. Still use caution.
There is a great push and pull between intense sweetness and then cooling and drying in the mouth. The aftertaste is dry and cool, sweetness disappears.
Push and pull between the initial intensity of the sweetness of the smell of the leaves. There's a drying and a cooling as you taste the tea, and a pullback from that sweetness. In other words, this commentator is really good. This commentator essentially says, well, I smell these leaves, and I'm sure that this tea liquor is going to taste like brown sugar, full of brown sugar. And then when you taste it, wait a minute, that's not what I'm tasting.
The leaves in the bag, tightly rolled, brown tweed, had a bright, slightly meadowish scent, and then deep in the French press before the water was added, a slight aroma of burnt sugar,
Good.
a sweetness, and then plump wet leaves have a slight vegetal scent.
So a meadow-like aroma from the dry leaves, almost a hint of sweetness from the dry leaves. After they get wet, there's, I believe, a scent of grassiness.
There's a slight vegetal scent.
A vegetal,
yes,
I'm sorry.
Exactly.
A vegetal scent. So this commentator is taking you from dry all the way to the wet leaves.
Somebody else gets a fruity caramel aroma of the leaves, a lovely light copper colored liquor, very pretty.
Fruity caramel scents from the leaves, a copper, beautiful look to the tea liquor. Great commentary. So far, everybody is capturing elements of this, and it's surprising because, again, your initial assessment is different as you go to actually taste the tea itself.
There's a hint of chocolate on the malt in the steeped leaves, and then there's something in the tea liquor. I would extend the previous comment on caramel to dried apricot and caramel.
So a hint of malt in the wet leaves themselves, and then the flavor. Not only is there a hint of caramel, but this particular commentator draws that out and says it's almost like there's dried apricot.
In the dry leaves, I get dried fruit. In the wet leaves, burnt sugar, sweetness, caramel.
In the dry leaves, dried fruit. In the wet leaves, hints of caramel and sugar, sweetness.
Somebody else is getting a sense of a lot of minerality as well.
So we have also a sense of minerality, and I want all of you to consider this comment because there is something else going on in here, and the minerality should give you a clue about what to look for. I ordinarily wouldn't start off the characterization as minerality, but it's not an incorrect characterization. I leapt actually to another conclusion, but again, based on there's something else going on in here. Yes.
Juicy mouthfeel. The aftertaste is also not quite getting this piece of the mouthfeel comment, Megan, but it's also drying on the teeth. And as somebody else notes, that the aroma of the tea reminds them of like a cake made with molasses.
Love both these comments. Juicy mouthfeel, almost like a drying on the teeth. This is a really interesting comment, and one that not many people have made heretofore, and yet it's an important comment because the teeth are actually part of the whole mouth surface that's being affected. And I get that sense of dryness on the teeth. And good catch on that comment. Then the following comment was, it's like a cake made from molasses. Love this comment because in my mind, when I drink this stuff, molasses comes to mind faster than the sweetness. Now, let's back up and make sure that we're all on the same page. Sweetness and caramel, caramelness, maltiness. What else have I heard? Slight hints of fruit, all in these wet leaves. There is no question. But once you get to the tea liquor, there's a surprise. That caramelness kind of graduates into something else. And molasses is a very close description of how I would characterize it. And in addition, capturing that type of flavor means that that sense of minerality you translated into there's one other word, and I don't want to say it. I'll wait until you say it. There's one other thing. And again, the minerality comment points to moving away from caramel, and it also points to one other, and it's a slight hint of something else in here.
The dry leaves remind another character, commentator of sweetgrass, apologies. And the wet leaves seem fruitier, very smooth mouthfeel.
Wet leaves seem fruitier. The dry leaves have a sense of wet grass. And I like this comment because the commentator has carefully moved from the wet leaves through to the, I'm sorry, from the dry leaves through the wet leaves, and then is heading into the actual quality assessment and then the dynamics of the aroma and the flavor. Yes.
Very smooth, which complements the dryness.
There we go. Smoothness and dryness. So now we're talking about quality. Does this thing belong in Sophie's? Smoothness and dryness. Well, those are characteristics we're always looking for.
There's a mouthfeel that's soft. There's a softness and then drying on the tip of the tongue. Juicy, not much astringency either.
Softness, juiciness on the tongue, almost no astringency. And actually your comment was better than my summary. Not much astringency. There is a little bit, but my goodness, compared to many of the teas that we've tasted over the last few weeks, this is extremely low astringency.
Someone else guessed a toastiness in the aftertaste.
So there's a toastiness. Good. Now we're closing in on that minerality. We're closing in on the molasses. We're changing that caramel to other elements. So a toastiness, and there's clearly a toastiness in this.
The flavor lingers, which leaves this freshness in the mouth.
Flavor lingers, leaving a freshness in the mouth. Great comment, because there is a density to this tea liquor, but because of the smoothness and the dryness, you don't notice the density right away. And because of that fresh feeling, you don't notice the density right away.
Someone else tastes orange, but not the citrus part, but the orange flavor like you would taste in honey.
Ah, love this comment. So there's an orangeness in the flavor. And let me describe what the commentator's really talking about. It's like an orangeness related to honey rather than the citrus fruit. And that's a great comment because, again, what you're doing is classic. You understand that the wet tea leaves themselves have this enormous sweet caramel punch, but then it's modulated when you get to the tea liquor, and we're talking molasses, we're talking honey, other things going on.
Someone else also notes that it has dried fruit after with a touch of honey-like sweetness. The tea liquor is very smooth and rich, leaves a tingling sensation mostly on the tip of the tongue.
Dried fruit, touch of honeyness in the flavor, a slight tingliness on the tongue, very, very smooth and rich. Love the fact that you used rich, because not only is the color suggestive of rich, once you get this in your mouth, it's like, oh my God, there's substance here. This is dense, but your use of the word rich is better in this case than dense, because it also suggests the huge variety of flavors playing in your mouth.
This slight drying and then juiciness is a contradiction, but it's very tasty and then very warming.
Drying and juiciness feels like a contradiction, but it exists, and it's very warming.
This aftertaste is very interesting, but I can't put my finger on that very distinct flavor.
Aftertaste is interesting, and this commentator is having a hard time putting exact words to what else is in that flavor, but they detect that there's other stuff in this flavor, and they're absolutely, there's one other element I still haven't heard yet. I'll give you a minute more or two, and then I'll tell you what other element is in it for me.
Someone else notes citrus as well, also harkening back to the orange comment. They also get citrus as it cools.
Citrus as it cools. So this is a great distinguisher. And the reason I like this comment is because the commentator links it to change in temperature. And so obviously in the cliff teas that we have, it's very obvious as the temperature changes, the changes in the flavor. Red teas, not so much, but this one is very complicated. And as the flavor is changing, you're detecting other things. Good catch.
On energetic, someone else also gets the warming quality more than typical as compared to other teas.
The warming quality. This commentator says it's more than typical. And by the way, even though you can't see it because, you know, my facial, I'm not sweating, but actually inside, I am warmed up more than usual. All right, so the one other element, and let's see after I say this, whether you also detect it. And so remember, this is an element among all the elements you've brought up. So I'm not saying this is dominating, but what I am saying is I was surprised as I was tasting in here and suddenly realized, oh my God, there is just the slightest earthiness. And that earthiness, if you are able to taste that, you combine that with the molasses, you combine it with a little bit of the honey and the fruity, and it's, wow, where did that come from?
Someone else finds it stimulating in a gentle but definite way, just stimulative.
Stimulative and gentle. So red teas, unlike green teas, will never be overstimulative. Green teas can be overstimulative. They can, for some people, make you feel like, oh my goodness, my stomach isn't feeling good. The red teas are stimulative insofar as they increase or leave you with the feeling that your circulation to your extremities, the circulation all over is increased.
Someone else finds the smell and the taste and the aftertaste. Smell the leaves and the aftertaste reminds them a bit of a Hong Kong style milk tea.
Oh, interesting. So this commentator says that they've had before, a long time ago, a Hong Kong style milk tea. And so the smell and the aftertaste is a little reminiscent of that.
A couple other people are getting the earthiness suggestion, their experience. Somebody smells a hint of earthiness on the warm, dry leaves. Somebody else can taste the earthiness. The best in the complex aftertaste, because it was hard to detect with all the other flavors.
This great set of comments. So you have some that smelled slight earthiness in the leaves. You have others who tasted very slight earthiness in the tea liquor. And then a commentator who kind of summarized and said it was hard at first to detect because of the general complexity of all the flavors. And I'll tell you, you're really on the money because it took me a couple tastes. I knew I was tasting something unusual, but I couldn't put my finger on it right away. And it took me a couple sips before, oh, yes, we do have a little something underneath all this complexity of everything else.
How old did you say that this tree was?
This tree, from our best estimate, is 700 to 900 years old.
Which would make it old, not ancient.
Yes, this is old, not ancient.
How long does it take to process the leaves? They're just brilliantly rolled.
They are. So the question is, how long does it take to process the leaves? The entire process, start to finish. This is false. Let me rephrase that. The process, the start being the withering to the finish being the baking, that took about 12 hours. So relatively quickly. And the reason you can't say start to finish, well, there's a process to pick, how long before picking gets to the withering, how are they withering? So there's all sorts of elements which contribute to that. And remember, every farmer is processing a little bit differently. And the reason we picked this one is because this one was so distinct among the farms that we went to in this region. It was like, we got to have this.
The complexity makes this very enjoyable. Can't wait to brew the second cup.
The complexity makes this extremely enjoyable. Can't wait to brew the second cup. You won't be disappointed with the second cup. And the complexity to this is really what drove me to the name, Luscious. You know, in the sense that Luscious implies overabundance, it implies just lots and lots and lots of things. That's how I came to give this name. This name in Chinese was just Lincang red tea. No, I'm sorry, Lincang old tree red tea. And again, I've explained about 100,000 times, I will never, ever put that on a board, because as soon as you say old tree red tea, well, there's a bunch of teas that are old tree. And if you can't remember Lincang, which most Americans can't unless they speak Chinese, it's useless. But Luscious, you will never forget, especially after this tasting experience.
As my cup cools, the citrus flavors become more pronounced.
As this commentator's cup cools, the citrus flavors become more pronounced.
The tea taste keeps evolving into the second cup that somebody's brewed.
Oh, I get that citrus flavor thing. I just tasted mine. That's cool. I'm sorry, say again.
Oh, just that somebody has a second mug going now and the taste keeps evolving.
So someone's doing a second pour and the taste keeps evolving. And this tea keeps giving and giving. And again, part of the title of Luscious is you just never get tired of this.
Did you say that the tea is processed 12 hours in 12 hours less time than usual for red tea?
No. So the question was, did I say that it was processed in 12 hours less time than usual? No, I said from withering to the baking stage, it was about a 12 to 14 hour processing period. Some red teas from this area, they'll process up to about 22, 24 hours. And again, everybody has different timings. Why? All right. If you wither outdoor, that's one thing. If you wither using a compressor in a temperature controlled, humidity controlled room, that's another thing. So the speed with which a farmer, all the farmers handle the processing has to be different, because the tools they're using are different and their experiences are different.
How many people are involved in the process of processing?
So this is a trick question. How many people are involved in the processing? Reason it's a trick question is because you have to segment how many people pick. So let's put the picking aside and let's just focus on the actual processing once it's brought in. So in total, there are about 8 people involved. For the pickers themselves, they have about 12 people. But if I had just said 20, that wouldn't have been useful to you, because the pickers are most of the time not involved in the processing. What are the exceptions to that rule? The exceptions to that rule are when you have a family member picking, and then afterwards, sometimes they'll do part of the process.
How does the flavor of this red change over years of storage as compared to a raw black or other teas that change as they age?
So this is a great question. Questioner says, we've talked about aging teas for a long time at Sophie's, and we've talked about the various types of tea that can be aged successfully. and we've mentioned red teas and we've mentioned raw blacks. What's the difference? So the red teas, generally speaking, as you age them, what happens depends a lot on what level of oxidation the farmer took it to. Because as you age, part of what occurs is further oxidation, further breakdown. Usually what that translates to is more intensity in sweetness. Now, I ask you this. If if a red tea was not sweet to begin with, and then I age it for 10 years, am I going to come up with molasses and sugary taste? The answer is no. It's got to have had those flavors already. So that's why with a red tea, you can almost always tell what direction it's going to go. If it tasted pretty thick and rich like this and had those hints of sweetness, that's going to deepen as it ages, and deepen a lot the longer you age it. So as opposed to a raw black, all right, let's think about raw black for a minute. Raw black is very close to green, right? And the reason it's changing, the primary reason it's changing, is because of fermentation to begin with. So the first 5 years are all about fermentation. And so that's a microbial process, right? Fungi, molds, bacteria, all that good alive organic stuff, working on the tea leaf, changing the flavor. What happens somewhere between 5 and 8 years? Oxidation, degradation because of age starts to influence the flavor. And in the beginning, it's very slow, but then it starts to speed up. And somewhere around 12 to 15 years old, oxidation and fermentation are in a race. Now, who's going to win this race? It's always going to be oxidation. Fermentation starts to slow way, way, way down in that time frame, and the oxidation takes off. And therefore, that's why you have more distinct steps in flavor change than you do in red. Red, how you treated it. If you are from Yunnan, you have, if you're from the Yunnan Mountains, you've oxidized anywhere from 80, 85, 86%. If you're from Lincang, you've oxidized anywhere from 88 to about 94%. Therefore, what do you have left to work with? Well, if you oxidize to 88%, you have 12% more, theoretically. You know, now we're talking Western science and theory and so forth. But you get the message. You have a certain runway you can work with, and that aging, the natural aging, will affect the tea. So let's think about raw black for a minute. What do you have to work with? Well, let's see. In the beginning, the oxidation is about 1%. Oh my gosh, my runway is much longer. That means the changes I'm going to go through are more dramatic and less predictable.
Chemistry, any studies on health attributes?
So health attributes. The alleged health attributes I want to talk to you about this morning, because there are several very interesting studies on red tea and depression. So I want to expand that. And now, as I go through this explanation, you'll understand why I'm expanding that. We should say tea in general rather than red tea, but a lot of the studies have been done on red tea. And what they're finding, and this is in various countries. So in the Middle East, where they consume a lot of red tea, There's studies in Japan where they're not consuming red tea, but they're consuming green tea, and they're getting the same results. So what they believe, and China, by the way, China has produced recently quite a few studies related to tea and depression. So what they believe, and who is the they here? It's scientists. What scientists believe is that caffeine and probably the polyphenols work in concert to dramatically reduce depression. So which one of those polyphenols? I mean, because I'd like to go to the health food store and just pick up a pill because I'm a Westerner. I want to get antidepressed right away. The answer is they don't know yet. There is a theory about theaflavins, but I've seen a much stronger theory about EGCG. And I've also seen a theory related to L-theanine. So these are all compounds we've talked about before, and you can believe how they may have some effect on mitigating depression. But everybody is saying one thing for sure is at work here, and that's the caffeine itself. So in the studies where they worked with this, it appears that 1 to 4 cups of tea will get you this great anti-depression benefit. And what they say in that 1 to 4 cups, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, didn't you say before that Indian tea has much more caffeine? Turkish tea has a lot of caffeine. I did say those things. So scientists have actually come up with numbers. So they say so long as you don't exceed 650 milligrams of caffeine in a day, so 1 to 4 cups, you're probably going to get this benefit. And again, they're driving at caffeine, but they're looking real hard at these other mitigating substances. Yeah.
Any suggested food pairing?
Suggested food pairing. Well, this is a great tea. It's a great afternoon tea, especially if your guests are from Europe, because remembering that Europeans are used to a little bit heavier tea, especially in quotes, black tea. This is rich enough so that it leaves an impression in the mouth and it's not too thin for them. Now, that didn't answer your question at all. That just answered who should your guests be. Let's answer what everybody should be eating. So with this tea, first off, don't serve it with the meal. This is an after the meal. And so during the summer, have a nice salad, have anything that will give you lighter flavors in the mouth. You can even have, a little ice cream for dessert, and then pull this out and serve this. That would be my suggestion.
This tea has the longest aftermouth sensation, aftertaste, mouth sensation of any tea I've had in the shop.
So this commentator says, your choice of the name Luscious is very appropriate because it has the longest aftertaste of any tea that they've ever had in the shop. So it was not an accident that this tea got this name.
Someone else observes this is not a jolting form of caffeine. It's gentle, stimulating, and bracing.
So this caffeine is not jolting, stimulating, embracing, warming, absolutely. Our red teas, so Chinese red teas in general, are not going to be jolting because the actual amount of caffeine is not that much compared to a white tea, it can be as low as half of what a cup of white tea is. So it's a range, by the way, because every varietal is going to be a little bit different. Every processing is going to create caffeine in the tea. It doesn't create caffeine. That's false. Every processing is going to leave a certain amount of caffeine in the tea. In other words, this one was processed a little more, so this one will have a little less caffeine. Because remember the rules now for caffeine. The more you process any plant, whether it be coffee or tea, the less caffeine there is. All right, how are we doing? Oh my gosh, I didn't even get to my story today. Well, we don't need a story today. The tea was the story. And actually, every week, really, it should be the tea is the story. The stories I tell, while fun, that's not the real picture. You had much more fun than you would have had with my story with the tea. Your commentary today was terrific. You really got into this. You penetrated all the flavors that really exist in this. This is a very complex tea, and you got that. And you stayed with it and brought out all of the complexity. So great job. We always enjoy going through these sessions with you. Next week, we start off a new set of teas. And as I recall, next week, we're going to do a green tea. In fact, the next 2 weeks, we're going to do a green tea. And I'm trying to remember, I remember, we're going to do balance and graciousness. And then the last week, we're going to do mountain relic. So again, we've grouped together green teas and a raw black because there is a relationship. And we want you to see that relationship clearly when we go through this next couple of weeks. In the meantime, remember, there's still COVID out there. And so let's be careful this week. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.